Hello, everyone. So happy to see you all here. Um, Welcome to the Brooklyn Rails 515th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, an events assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a tribute to Sylvère Lotringer, featuring Charles Gaines, Paul McCarthy, Nura Waddell, Donatien Grau, and Donatien Grau. We are also thrilled to welcome our poet Eileen Miles here to close today's program. And before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions. And over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has undertaken a miraculous journey, bringing together in a single monthly publication art, music, dance, film, theater, and literature, along with social and political meditations. As a small nonprofit, we do need your support. Your contribution will directly support our writers, guest artists, production staff, and all of our operations here in the Rail. So please check the chat for information and links to donate in just a moment. Now, I am thrilled to introduce today's guest and host. Charles Gaines is a member of the CalArts School of Art faculty. His work is in prominent collections, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the Studio Museum in Harlem, as well as Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Paul McCarthy first established an artistic practice which sought to break the limitations of painting by using unorthodox materials such as bodily fluids and food. For 18 years, McCarthy taught performance, video installation, and art history in the New Genres department at UCLA. He has exhibited extensively worldwide. Writer, scholar, translator, and mother Nura Waddell is an editor for Semiotext. She edited Investigations, the expanded field of writing in the works of Robert Morris in 2015, and has published a book of poetry called Odd Directions in 2009. And finally, the head of contemporary programs at Musée d'Orsay in Paris, Donatien Grau, is an editor-at-large of Purple Fashion Magazine and the Brooklyn Rail. He has published widely on the arts and culture of the Roman Empire, on 19th and 20th century literary and art history, as well as on contemporary art and culture. Thank you all for joining us today, and I will now pass the mic over to Donatien, who will begin our conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Well, it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here to celebrate the life of Sylvère Lotringer. I'm not really here in my qualities of Musée d'Orsay staff or scholar of ancient Roman history. I'm really here as somebody who over the last years became friendly with Sylvère, was very fortunate to do a book of conversations with him, which were really happened over times, and to sort of witness this extraordinary life of his work and his I was almost gonna say a sort of informal mandate to change things with extreme fluidity, but also extreme advocacy. And I was very I was very fortunate, to have these conversations with him over the years. And recently, in conversation with Iris Klein and Hedy El-Khalti, it became very important to publish these conversations that came out a couple of months before Sylvère passed away. And so after Sylvère passed away, I was very humbled that Iris and Hedy and Feng Wei sort of tasked me with this extraordinary challenge to celebrate the life of Sylvère Lotringer in as many ways as possible. And what was very important was that, I mean, Sylvère had many lives. He was a scholar, he was a thinker, he was an activist, he was a writer, he was a free human being. He was an immense inspiration to artists, practicing filmmaker himself, such an immense inspiration in so many ways. And what the Brooklyn Rail is, and what is extraordinary about the Brooklyn Rail, is the openness of it, and the fact that we could invite, in ways that weren't possible for, say, the New York Times, the LA Times, or even our Forum. We were able to invite this very wide range of figures to celebrate Sylvère's work, sort of fluid work, his extraordinary energy, and his immense relevance today. And so it was extraordinary to be able to work, under Iris and Eddie's stewardship, and I'm deeply grateful to both Iris and Eddie. I'm a huge fan of both of them, and they've been immense in this journey. And so I'm also very grateful to Georgia Willis, who helped me at the Brooklyn Rail in putting together this series of texts that you can find online on the Brooklyn Rail website. And if you think of the wide range of participants, and I want to name all of them here because they have been so extraordinarily generous with their time and energy, whether it's Benny Arcade, Dodi Bellamy, Franco Berardi, Catherine Bigelow, Lizzie Borden, Bernard Brunon, Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, François Cuisset, Brigitte Engler, Susie Flatto, Charles Gaines, here present, Emmanuel Guattari, Denis Ollier, Carol Anconarides, Chris Kraus, Richard Kushner, Arthur Lindsay, Christian Marazzi, Paul McCarthy was also here with us. Josephine McSepper, Eileen Miles was very generously agreed to read, to celebrate Sylvère at the end of the session. Michael Oblowitz, Andrew Perchuk, François Pierron, Sean Kelly Reagan, Ayanna Rines, Jay Sanders, Armando Viana, Catherine Vaughan, and of course, the legendary, iconic, and superstar Nora Vidal. So it was this and what I wanted this conversation to be was to be at the same time very present, to be about what can be drawn from Sylvère's extraordinary life and work, and what can be drawn towards the future, towards what can be learned from Sylvère. And I was very fortunate that these extraordinary figures agreed to participate, whether as artists, thinkers, philosophers, poets, that you would agree to participate in this, and I am immensely grateful. So this will be very simple. It will just be about, saying what we learn, what can be learned from Sylvère, what we can bring into the future from his 80 years of life experience, work, creativity, and freedom. So maybe I can start with you, Charles, and ask you that very difficult and simple question I just outlined. What did you learn from Sylvère Lotringer?
Charles, you just have to turn your mic on. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
All right. So it's an interesting question for me because what I learned from what I just recently began to understand is that I was influenced by Sylvère's contributions to American thought before I actually knew about him, and a decade before I met him, because at a certain point, I met him while during the times that he came to visit CalArts. I'm retired now, but I used to teach at CalArts, and Sylvère was friends with many people in the critical studies department at CalArts. And that was the first time that I actually came in contact with him. But his influence is vast for me, because one of the major questions that I was struggling with when I was a young artist was the question of the legitimacy of critiquing the idea of subjectivity. And I was interested in trying to unpack that, because I identified the notion of subjectivity with the notion of identity. And and the political dimensions of identity having to do with race, because I was raised in the Jim Crow South. I was born in the Jim Crow South and raised it for a number of years. And so the idea of identity is a problem because I couldn't understand the notion of identity outside of the notion of race and class, and I always wondered, why these rules existed. I thought later I thought, well, maybe it's this unpacking the idea of identity and subjectivity that would reveal that. So the tools for doing that came from Sylvére's influence, because he introduced into the American milieu Saussure, the idea of the predominance of language as a structuring agent, and that helped me a great deal. And later on, his introduction of the rise of Foucault and others, particularly Guattari, Deleuze and Guattari, really helped me sort of unpack another idea that I have trouble with, and that's an essentialist notion of identity that was being used in the Black community. And I needed to unpack that. And so French theory really helped me sort of displace those ideas. So I have a great debt.
Thank you so much, Charles. I have one follow-up question before asking the same question to Nora and then to Paul. I think there's something really interesting in the way your work functions according to systems, but that are always open-ended. And that for me connects to the notion of course, the rhizome and the deconstruction, the idea that you could have an entity that could have all these different layers, all these connections, but at the same time would always be open, would be full and open at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yes, in my work, I take images of existing things, predominantly, for example, a tree, and I digitize those images and apply them to a system. That system is involved in the production of a work of art. So we're looking at the images in the context of art, the tree, for example. So in that process of making, of course, the standard is that the images are informed by the subjectivity of the artist. I wanted to displace the artist's subjectivity in that process, and so therefore I developed a rule-based system to do that. Rather than the rules acting as a set of canons, I wanted to underscore the idea that the rules actually put into place an indeterminate and contingent-based system where you actually couldn't know, paradoxically, how things would turn out and where they were going. So that for me dealt with two aspects of subjectivity. One is that there's this relationship between the subjectivity of the artist and what is produced as a work of art as a function or an image of that subjectivity. And it also so displaced that, but also it displaced the idea that the experience of art was ruled by one's aesthetic response or one's response to that subjectivity, which is usually called an aesthetic response. I wanted to unpack that too. All this goes back to the idea of questioning and pushing the way that we understand and experience works of art. That radical approach to the institution is something I got from the influence of French theory.
And another question I want to ask you before then I actually will move to Paul and then to Nora, but it's about transgression. The notion of transgression, which is so central to what Sylvère was interested in and bringing into the American context. How does it fit into the way you responded to that work?
My work you're referring to.
Yeah. You responded, what you're reading is, because it's such a key idea, such a key notion, such a key experience, transgression, and how does it what do you make of it in, you know, your work, your reception, your thoughts? How did you take it and bring it somewhere else?
Yeah, well, it was my idea. What's key to my thinking is that a work of art is a radical practice that is one aspect that it takes from modernism, that is always challenging itself, always challenging itself. It's always challenging the canons and rules of its formation, and so it's a radical practice. And it was that idea of treating a work of art as a radical practice to me made it possible to treat art's ability to radically critique the world or radically critique the society. So any sort of strategy of transgression, even in anything that happens, for example, in the realm of challenging ideas of art, at the same time challenges society. It approaches the world and from a critical perspective. That connection to what might be thought of as theory, you know, which in a lot of cases people think that theory is anathema to art. That idea that theory can put into place this element that can cause a radical view of the world, or a view of the world that is challenging. I think that you know, to try to frame it differently, I think that it is theory that allows art that power. And for me, what seems to be intrinsic to Sylvère's ideas, that theory is a radical practice. I mean, I incorporated that into the realm of art in order to emphasize and illuminate that power of art.
Thank you so much, Charles. That's an amazing starting point to sort of think about the radicality of art and theory separate and together. And I think that is something that probably inspires you, Paul. What do you make of it?
Say that again. I'm here, but say it again.
Yeah, I know. Charles was outlining the relation between radical thought, radical theory, and radical art as being something that was brought by Sylvère's work over the last 40 to 50 years. I know this is something, this notion of radical theory, radical art, and looking at it through the lens of Sylvère's vision, through semiotext and through his own work and his own words, are things that you personally respond a lot to. So I'd be very interested in hearing your response, indeed.
Okay. I was thinking that being on the West Coast in the 60s and far, far away from Europe and what was going on in Europe in the 60s, and being in, you know, my first sort of journey in this direction, and in one way becomes the writings of R.D. Laing and Wilhelm Reich and Irving Goffman too, and a number of other people. And also the West Coast and Santa Cruz with Marcuse and Norman O'Brien. So then you had you know, for me, the influence of Cage and Duchamp and the beats, meaning, whatever that word beat means, but meaning Wilhelm Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg. So there's the bubble that I'm existing in, along with I guess, California and the Black Panthers and the movements in Berkeley. And something that came to mind that I was thinking about in relationship to Sylvère and something Sylvère had said about Guattari. And there was an artist in San Francisco and Berkeley, Paul Cotton. And Paul Cotton was obsessed with Norman O'Brien. And he went to Norman O. Brown's class with riding a donkey and carrying an inflatable lightning bolt, like a small lightning bolt. And he threw the lightning bolt at Norman O. Brown during a lecture and hit Norman O. Brown in the head. And Cotton's view was to make the word of Norman O. Brown flesh. And in a sense, to take the theory into reality, into life. And I think when Guyotat described when Sylvère described Guyotat and talked about Guyotat and what Guyotat was doing in a sense, and Artaud, this breaking down of the self and the breaking down the values of Western culture, but the breaking down of the self and that journey, that journey to do that. And somehow that statement really registered in both, because I was very affected by Paul Cotton saying to make the word of Norman O. Brown flesh, like Norman O. Brown could he do really what he was saying? And could he live that life? And in a way, the journey of Guyotat is really something, and the journey of Artaud. And Sylvère pointing that out made that bridge for me between Guyotat and the lightning bolt of Paul Cotton. And so that statement was, in a way, which came late for me. I mean, it didn't come until I had read that passage. And but yet I had felt that for a long time. There's in Sylvère's life as something else, because I viewed him as a type of connector, and as a connector, meaning he's connecting people and thought. And it takes, at the level that he did it, it takes a special brain and a special person to be able to interact the way he did with those that he interacted with, and to merge the thought of these individuals, these artists, these writers, and to not only be connected to them and to find them, but to interact with them, and then to be a kind of invisible person, to be invisible in a certain way, to be the editor, to be the connector, is to be invisible, and to present the other. And there lies a difference maybe between the Guyotat journey and the Sylvère journey. And the Sylvère journey is, in both cases, the subject of being humble is really apparent in who they are as human beings. So the subject of being humble, the recognition of the connector and the importance of the connector to culture, to civilization, being humble, yeah. And then this other aspect, which I really appreciated in Sylvère, was and it's a kind of roaming in a situationist sense. This roaming, like going to Australia, going back to Chicago. I view it this way. I have no idea really what it is, but I view it as a kind of roaming and a kind of going with wherever something takes you. And then when you get there, to make something out of what comes your way, like what's in front of you, like to begin semiotek with the students at Columbia is a way of accepting what's coming your way. And that, I think, was really, it's like to work with the given or to work with what's in front of you. I think that's really critical. And it's also a humbling position. That's it.
Thanks, Paul. I mean, what's extraordinary about this conversation is how organic it is, how each of you is sort of passing the thread onto the other, because you sort of took this discussion on radicality, and now it leads directly to Nora, who, aside from being an editor at Semiotext and a former student of Sylvère at Columbia, is also a translator of Pierre Guillotin. So it's as if you had done everything to prepare for Nora's speech. Yes, to you, Nora.
Well, thank you first for having all of us and having organized this, Tunisia. Thank you so much. Yeah, Sylvère, I was Sylvère's undergrad student. So I met him when I was 18. I was an undergrad at Barnard, and I had lost my father 2 years before. And so Sylvère was a kind of father for me, although he didn't, he invented what a new kind of father could be that was not a traditional father figure. And then I was living in Paris and I thought, oh, what can I do? I can get a job for 5 years at Columbia as a grad student. And so Sylvère got me a job there because he got me into the French department. And so I guess for me, Sylvère created a home, a safe place in the institution. And I think semiotext is that possibility of a home as well in the institution. But then it also, as a safe haven, worked against the power structure and the forms of domination and the forms of power play that occur in the institution and that are related to knowledge and transmission and how power is infiltrated in those systems. So there's a lot I would like to say about Sylvère, and I took so many notes. So it's interesting for me to try to just be here and follow the thread of this conversation kind of in the unknown. But I want to say that there's a very problematic kind of development that's happening right now. So recently there's been I read this article in Le Monde, French journal, French kind of newspaper, governmental newspaper in a sense. And it's pitting together semiotext and Sylvère's dismantling strategy of power in the institution, specifically the Schizoculture Conference, where he brings together Foucault and Deleuze, Guattari, and connects them to activists and to people in the art world. And then a recent symposium that happened in France in January, which was called What to Reconstruct from Deconstruction, and kind of saying that the radical dismantling that Sylvère operated is at the origin of let's say, the takeover of the institution of the white academy by radical activism. And so kind of somehow linking this to also a call by the French Minister of Higher Education to weed out Islamo-leftism in the university, and which was refused by the CNRS, which is the National Research Center in France. And I think connected as well to the recent series of legislations in the United States against critical race theory in 50 states. I think there are currently or have been attempts to bar that from being taught in schools. And so in this conference that was held at the Sorbonne in January, the sociologist Nathalie Heinisch, who is a sociologist of art, who had written recently, I think last year, a book kind of reclaiming universalism and against communitarianism. She says, oh, we should be careful to distinguish and to render impermeable the academy from activism. We should not invite artists, activists to seminars. And this is happening right now in a kind of statecraft. And these questions are being talked about, and they are having effects, legal effects. So I think that this requires really very precise kind of unpacking to understand how one thread can lead to this, and also distinguishing a whole series of hoax that were also somehow related to Sylvère's dismantling. So I mean, for example, the so-called hoax in 1996, in which this physicist publishes a false paper in the Social Text Journal, claiming, that quantum gravity is a social linguistic construct. And then more recently, I think 2017, 2018, there's this new hoax, so-called Squared, which 3 authors are exposing kind of issues in what they call grievance studies, so like gender studies, in post-colonial theory, critical race theory, queer theory, intersectional feminism. So I guess I just want to point out that there have been real institutional effects, a backlash. I feel like we're seeing a backlash of all of these attempts. Sylvère is certainly not the only one. There are many actors in this history. But what I want to say, kind of in response to that, is that Sylvère was not a dismantler out of resentment. He never believed that he occupied a position of truth or a position of power. He was a pataphysician, and this term comes from the French playwright Jarry, and Baudrillard was also a pataphysician. Pataphysics is a kind of absurdist way to dismantle the belief in knowledge, but he also was interested in relating to systems of signs as a kind of psychoanalyst, so having a floating attention to see the symptoms that could be located in language to kind of point to what's happening underneath. And he was also a Deleuze and Guattarian in the sense that he understood that reason is always intrinsically linked to delirium, so Deleuze and Guattari have all this writing about that. So I guess just to circle back to the influence of Sylvère on my life, he held me in the institution. He opened up a site for us, I think, in the institution. A lot of people in my case, and I want to really honor all of the other students of Sylvère and all of the people that he helped, so he was really so very generous to kind of give us that place. And he also showed us the workings of power within those institutions and dismantled them, tried to dismantle them, but it was always with a fundamental generosity and humility. And just on this question of humility, it's interesting. There's a discourse, I don't remember the reference, but I can find it, a difference between humility and is a position, whereas humiliation is being humbled in a violent way, you know. So that's something that I could add to that thread.
I think all three of you are raising important questions that have to do with knowledge, because, you know, the debate you were alluding to, Nora, is in a way an attempt to return to a form of positivism, which today is slightly, you know, outdated and extremely problematic. So, you know, but there's a question here that I think is important to address about what can be known. Because and it's a question that you can ask about Sylvère, and to an extent you can ask it about Foucault. Because, you know, is what he is doing through writing, editing. Eddie was just saying that there's much more writing. You know, Sylvère has this reputation of being a non-writer, somebody who writes very scarcely. But Eddie was saying that he actually wrote a lot. Didn't want to unify it. Was much more about the dissemination of writing rather than the authority of the big book. And even one of his most recent piece of writing, Étant donné, is an absolute masterpiece, you know, about his childhood. So there is a question here that you can ask about, you know, is it about dismantling knowledge as a positivistic, authoritarian, to an extent oppressive structure? Is it about that? But as you do that, do you preserve and open up all the spaces for knowledge, for knowing rather than for knowledge? And I think that's a key issue that I want to ask all three of you. Maybe Charles first, then Paul, and then of course you, Nora.
I was opening up my mic. You can hear me. That's a complicated question. I was hoping you'd ask somebody else first so I can feed off of their answer. But from my own standpoint, I want to make the point that Sylvère was very important for me in linking these issues of theory, which is usually spoken about in terms of these broad critiques of Western institutions and systems of knowledge. Well, in that critique of institution systems of knowledge, one of the things that was least paid attention to is the issue of race and identity. And there were actually debates about whether constructs of race and identity were part of those powered institutions of modernist knowledge, rather being a victim of it. That is, that if one felt that one hadn't addressed an idea of the racial self, that one is buying into a presupposition that's advanced by modernism of a totalizing theory of self. And I always thought that Sylvère provided just the opposite argument, that he provided a way of including discussions of race and identity, and maybe even gender for that matter, by utilizing this destabilizing and contingent-based rhizomatic attack on knowledge to the areas of race. And so one unpacks, for example, the legitimacy of the idea of whiteness, or as a construct. In other words, one can suggest that that rather than a whiteness being a race, whiteness is a construct, and it's a construct that is empowered by these institutions and it's preserved by these institutions. So in this respect, that the very interesting issues that was just mentioned, having to do with how there's this fear that the left is going to take over the institutions. See, I mean, my attitude about that is probably hyper simplistic. That the activism from that is because of the issue of race. There's this, and gender until there is this general notion that there's a conservative resistance to that. Even these post-structuralist theorists had to suffer about how they're sort of dismantling some of the hallmarks of European knowledge. So there was that reaction, but it became really vicious and humiliating, if I want to employ that term, one's attached to notions of identity. I mean, it was really activist. And in here, I think that I believe that that implicit in Sylvère's attempt to create this montage of ideas and getting people to talk across discipline, laid the footwork and groundwork to being able to see how that this idea that when talking about the authoritarian forces of power, that it is inclusive of the idea of race and inclusive of the idea of gender, not that constructs of identity around race and gender is powered, is part of that power network. It's actually inclusive and provides the tools to, I think, ultimately realize or address what's actually going on. The kind of cynicism that's at the core of what we call conservative theory.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely accurate about this, how we opened up the discussion, and that the destabilization of identity was actually the center of the project. Paul, do you want to react to that?
I mean, it's taking a diversion from that, I guess, but it was trying to see your original question to being, as I understand it, the question of knowledge. Can you give me that, what you were asking? Because I think,
I was asking because Nora was talking about the idea of going back to also Charles' phrases, destabilizing knowledge. And there's a question here of whether the prospect is knowledge as a form of cultural construct, and what is the space for knowing once you are destabilizing knowledge as a cultural construct.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to take it back to wherever I can see a window in this thing. For me, there's a kind of a foundation or a base, and it sits with Nietzsche, and it sits with the questioning of what had been constructed as human life, I guess, in a very unaware sense. I think that's what Nietzsche was doing, was opening the floodgate in a way, or trying to, and that was to realize you were alive. And I think it's a base for that, and out of that, and of course the subject of Alfred Jarret and the absurd. And I was thinking about how in a way, what the artist did, and what the writer, what the philosopher and the thinkers have done, was to try and explain this absurd life, and to try and break that down, and to help to set up a situation in which we can see what we are and who we are, and that at a very base level, because and then of course the consumer society just keeps building and building on an absurdity, and so of course there's a resistance to dismantling all of that, and it's the security of this consumer culture that fights against this breaking open the door, and that breaking open the door to realize you're alive, or to realize the construction of this absurdity. And I think that was Jaret and yeah, Jaret is a good example, is that you create through an absurdity, and you talk through an absurdity. That's one method of art, I think, is to talk through the absurdity. And so I think the subject of what we've constructed as knowledge being slammed at, or pushed at, or tearing down in a certain way, to see what we are as humans. And in some ways, could you say it begins with Nietzsche? No, it begins, it's been there for centuries, but in this line of thought, it certainly, he gets pointed at. It's knowledge built up being seen as absurd, and by seeing as absurd, and how do you affect that absurd construction, you know? How do you affect that? And you know, that's why the subject of war, violence, which are the epitomes of that absurdity, and you know, the subject of death, the subject of war, the subject of consumer, the consumption, the constant consumption. Yeah, I don't know what to say. That's it.
Maybe I wanted, I guess it's hard to speak about these things, that this kind of impact of Sylvère, because he spread through so many disciplines. He had so many dismantling effects, one of them being translation from 1968 France to 1970 New York, another one being academic production of knowledge within a set of different disciplines, political science, sociology, philosophy, into conversation with music and John Cage, into French departments, and then, you know, so there's a geographic translation, there's a disciplinary translation, and so it's hard to kind of find one's way within that. So I guess I thought that I would just read a couple quotes. Sylvère's, yeah, I mean, I can't, thanks for the comment. Yeah, so it's so much to unpack, you know, but in his books, so Sylvère published these two books early on, Crazy About Artaud and Overexposed, and they're interesting in terms of method. And we can expand this method, of course, to the conferences and to the recording device as a method, you know, this kind of investigative method, and also the films investigating a crime scene. But I guess just moving from these two books, in the Crazy About Artaud, he says that this book, so it's a series of interviews that he does with the people who treated Artaud, with the psychiatrists, with Poetic, who was a friend of Artaud's. So it's like a investigation after the death of Artaud, you know. And he writes, Mad Like Artaud does not intend to add one more layer of commentary to the bitter controversies that have been surrounding the cursed poet's work since his death in 1948. Nor does it take sides among the different camps who are still haggling over his corpse. So interesting, you know, positioning. It's not adding an interpretation. It's not adding to the production of knowledge about certain definitive understandings. And it's not haggling over his legacy of his corpse, which kind of can give us some input also at the futurity of Sylvère. But he says the book speaks of or from the site where madness itself is simmering, and that's the translation. But in French, the term is il parle du lieu où se travaille la folie. It speaks from or of that place where folly, craziness is working or works itself, you know, works on itself, is producing itself. So it's like the labor of folly, the labor of mourning, the labor of birthing, you know, that's where he is speaking from, and that's kind of what he's looking at. So again, how to maybe produce a subject that is not a subject of power in the sense of like accruing knowledge or taking sides. And then in the other book that he writes, Overexposed, this is a study of cognitive behavioral therapies of so-called sexual deviance. And so Sylvère was hired, he's a professor at Columbia, and he's hired to be a semiotician for these behavioral therapists who are hiring him to actually create this language of tumescence so they can actually gauge the level of excitement of their subjects, because they're basically trying to treat these people who have been incarcerated for sexual crimes. They're forced into these treatments, and it's treatment via exhaustion or via boredom. So they are replaying their fantasies all the way until, you know, until they are bored of them. And so also it again shows like Sylvère's method and this kind of working at the place of craziness, or working within knowledge, but in a delirium way, you know. And so a series of transcripts that John Kelsey transcribed, recordings of interviews with his therapists and also of sessions with the patients. And then it is the blurbs at the back actually completely deconstruct the academic premise of the book as an academic book on, you know, this form of therapy, because they're by Burroughs, they're by Ballard, they're by Kathy Acker, you know, so they are fictional blurbs to frame a supposedly academic book, you know. So he's working from within the institution with tools of psychoanalysis, tools of literary history, tool. He's working in a very precise way as a dismantler, and he's always looking for. So in this case of overexposed, he's looking at the therapists and what their therapy is saying about society, you know, and how it's unveiling the society of consumption, and this, you know, how perversion kind of quote unquote shows that sexuality and desire and boredom and overexposure, you know, overextension of desire is pervading our social field. For Artaud, he's like doing an investigation and actually clarifying or figuring out that Artaud's unconscious and Artaud's folly is actually the forces of history who are running through him, and he is impersonating the fascist plague that is spreading throughout all of Europe. So Sylvère is actually doing a really serious job, sorry to use that term, you know, experimental practice, critique, research, whatever, you know, to actually look at how we are thinking about healing, how we're thinking about research, how we're thinking about academic investigation. And so all of this gets totally lost in the resentful backlash, you know, of systems of power. So I guess it really requires like a fine kind of gaze. Yeah, what I wanted to add.
There's another issue that I think we should discuss at some point, that the three of you were sort of pointing towards, you know, also you, Paul, with your reference to Nietzsche. I mean, you know, this famous Nietzsche quote that philosophers should become artists and artists philosophers. And so there is something that I think is really interesting in the relation between art and theory, but also in the relation between life and work, life and art, as you want to call it, in the sense that there was no real separation between theory and life, or there was a sort of attempt or will for unity between the research that was being operated in one's life. You know, I mean, Sylvère has spoken extensively about it, the 70s and 80s, and how this had an impact, and how French theory was possible because French theory was what he was living on the streets of downtown New York and in the lofts of downtown New York. And so I'd be interested in hearing the three of you discuss this interaction, this relation between art and life, or thought and life, or theory and life, and how this can be a model, this unity, or not a model for you. So who wants to start? Paul, do you take it a go?
Yeah, okay. You know, there's a thing of making work that goes under this sort of category of being transgressive, or that the avant-garde is dead, or that you can't shock anybody. You can't make shock. You can't shock to change the world. We've seen it all, and which maybe have something to do with what Nora was saying about, and what Sylvère was saying, or something to do with that, the study, this thing of exhaustion, like somehow we're full of whatever, you know, although there's just still a lot that's kept under the cover, but we're still, the mingling of the population in some form of taboo is existing under the cover, and in some ways, and but for me, the subject of when you get to theory and art, or what am I trying to do with art? And just recently and it's just a side note and maybe interesting, I don't know. Just recently I was reading some interviews with the filmmaker. I won't say his name, but he was talking, and I kind of thought there was some real similarities in the work, what he was doing with film and what I was doing. And so I was interested, and I was reading what he had to say. And at one point he goes into this whole thing. He goes into why these images that he's making, these images of violence, of images of abuse, and he's talking about and how he forms them. There was a particular way he would represent them or not represent them, but not represent the actual event, but hide the event, but you would know the event happened, how he was dealing with these subjects. And he talks about the important, or him trying to shock his audience and to get them to think. And he would talk about how he wanted them to think and to reconsider and to change who they were and to change society. And I was thinking, wow, that is something coming from a medium in which the audience is critical, like that he's making work for the audience. And in his brain, he thinks about the audience. And I was thinking from my own position, my own work, I've always sort of struggled with this thing of like, well, Paul, you're a shock artist, you're trying to shock us. And I always think, no, I don't even think about you actually. And when I would do performances in the 70s, I'd often begin by saying things like trying to dismiss the audience, that they were even in the room. And I would kind of talk about them like, you're not here, you go away, you're not here. I don't want to know you're here. You're stupid, you're stupid. And all that was about trying to remove myself from that audience. And it is more about an internal thing. It's more internal, or I've always had a problem with that thing of that you're trying to shock me. And I think, no, I don't know whether that's it at all. And but with this filmmaker, it was clear to him that that was his purpose. And I can't say that of myself, that in a way it has to do more with an internal moving through the world, or something to do with that. So the subject of art and life, that's what I have to say about it.
And what do you see, because normally there's this idea that philosophers or thinkers are in their world, and they are in a little cabin like Descartes, and here he was out there speaking to artists, speaking to people who were outside the norm, filming them, bringing them in, publishing them, creating this extraordinary world, inclusive world in which those who did not have a room to speak were given a room to speak and be acknowledged. How do you feel towards that?
Well, I think it's, in Sylvère's case, he's bringing, I guess, he was in some form bringing people together, and maybe the platform of Simultech is not only a platform that went out into the world, but it's also a platform that brought people together. So it functioned that way too, and what scale was it? And it stayed within a certain scale, although it seemed to have a huge effect. And I think the effect is not just you know, he brought attention to these people, and it's what these people had to say that that became so effective, I guess. But he also, I think, you know, seemed to have a great respect for Guyotat and Artaud. That's what, and what that internal journey was for them. And you know, like maybe I don't know, less respect for, maybe, I don't know what to say about that, like maybe less respect for those who make a show, you know, maybe, I don't know.
Well, then the question,
I don't know how to talk about that.
okay, then I move the question on to you, Charles. You are a philosopher artist and an artist philosopher. So I'd be curious to, you know, hear your thoughts on this blend in which the thinker, the philosopher, the theorist could become, in a way, a figure. Sylvère himself was, you know, he was a literary writer, he was an editor, he was a filmmaker. He took in all these lives in what he made. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this bringing together in one person of editing, writing, making images as well, recording images.
Well, when I was a student, I was introduced to this book by Henri Faucillon called The Life of Forms in Art. And Faucillon is a very famous art historian, you know, Renaissance and Baroque. And he wrote this little book to try to answer questions about what is art history, you know, and it wasn't a theory book. In fact, he says this is not, he's not proposing a theory of art history. He's trying to unpack it and explain what it was. And it was a very influential reading for me for many reasons. But one of the things that I was puzzled about is why was it a theory? You know, why wasn't these arguments and statements theories? And I think that that in part wasn't theoretical because it was such a montage of bringing different things together. That is that the idea of art, or what art history is unpacked. When it's unpacked, it's made up of all of these different parts that come together somehow within the academic discipline, and that got me interested in thinking about thinking about it in terms of my teaching. So in the early 70s, I created this course called Content and Form, and trying to find a way, which was unpopular at the time, of linking theory and practice. That you know, there was this common idea that any kind of intellectual enterprise with respect connected with art it turns out to be, you know, sort of a suffocating canon, and that therefore it fought against and dismantled the idea of the art experience itself. And I thought that was a problem because it was an argument that said that, you know, don't think about art, which means to me that people can get away with a whole lot of stuff, you know, because you don't have to worry about people being critical of whatever it is you do or say. And so I wanted to bring into the classroom a legitimacy for the space of critical thinking or the act of thinking about art. But this is interesting because the way that I did that was that I, for example, you know, introduced some of these ideas that ultimately, but there's some of these ideas that we've been talking about in terms of post-structuralist theory. But what I did was that I tried to bridge those ideas with the idea of the practice itself. And simply, what I simply did was that I would propose projects for students to solve, and the projects were, like Zen koans. They're literally problems that had no answer. In fact, they were riddled with contradictions and paradox. So there was no way in the world that there could be that any response to the project could be considered a right answer. And what I found was that I had to struggle with the students to have embraced that relationship with the problem. That is, even though I would tell them that there was no right answer, yet at the same time you have to tell us how you came to your conclusion. They had a difficult time releasing themselves from the need to come up with an answer to that directly links not only to the problem, but would link everybody to the problem. That it would be this sort of in the most academic sense, this sort of general embrace of a solution to a problem, because one can recognize certain rules that are being followed in order to come to that solution. So reflecting on what Paul was saying, reflecting on what Paul was saying, that what I actually introduced within the realm of theory, an absurdity, that the only way to work through, let me put it this way, the only way to work through or to critically think about art is to embrace the art idea as an absurd construction. I didn't use the word absurdity because even then I didn't want to copy Paul, but I did no matter what, how many times I said it, I said that that there are no right answers. They were hampered by the problem because they thought there was a right answer. And I got a lot of people saying that, I can't do this problem because, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, how can we determine it? So for me, the biggest hurdle that I had in trying to teach the relationship between theory and the practice of art is to unpack or dislocate any normative or ideological framing of what constitutes a work of art, or how you should do a work of art. That how to unpack that, find ways of unpacking that. And in the practice itself, the resolution, finding a way to deal with the absurd is a pragmatic way of dealing with the idea of absurdity as a theoretical strategy, that can actually result in produce works of art. I wanted to suggest that as we're talking about this idea of the absurdity, the indeterminate, with respect to the relationship between theory and practice, I wanted to say that ultimately for me, where I wind up is in a practical space. It's just a practical space that is not defined in traditional ways. For example, I was talking earlier about my critique of subjectivity. So I wanted to unpack the notion of subjectivity by attacking it with a set of absurd assumptions that are, a set of absurd assumptions. So the result of that produces, I still think, an idea of subjectivity, but it's not an idea that's based upon the traditional notions of sort of the ontological structure that exists around our conventional notions of subjectivity. That it's one where I think personally that operates, that deals with this idea in the immediate present, not within a ontological framing or not in terms of a historical model. And I find that a very, very practical place, because not a pie in the sky place, and one that really, for me personally, helped me understand myself as a Black person in the world, that I think that generally living in the United States as a Black person, one is constantly discovering they're living in a completely absurd environment that seems very logical and rational to everybody else, but it constantly makes no sense to the Black people, so that they're constantly trying to reconstruct create a space of stability around them because of that. And so for me, that's a real place. It's not like existing in the schizophrenic absurd, or if we can say that maybe the schizophrenic absurd is not so schizophrenic and not so absurd.
Yeah, wow, absolutely. I guess what I would say about this politics, theory and art and the practical and the absurd, as Charles, you just really nailed it. So Deleuze has a lot to say about, art, the ways of different ways of thinking of the different, so there's art, science, philosophy, and how they operate. And each has its own logics. And so then we get into this whole kind of sometimes convoluted conversation about art and theory. And it can be interesting, but it can also be abstract. And so I like bringing it back to practical. And I guess within each field of thinking, if you want to call it thinking or practice, things are gained. It's like hard to get some clarity. It's a struggle. And I think Sylvère was really clear about that. He really disliked armchair Marxists, what he would call armchair Marxists, and the last books that he published, and I want to mention these because I think they're important, books from the Party for the Indigenous of the Republic, Indigenous or Indigène, Uriah Boutelja, Cédric Chiari, French political activists. I mean, he also published a number of political activists. The Italian Autonomists, he did that book, the Semiotext did that book on Germany. He published Amir Haas, Israeli journalist, Shlomo Sand. You have to work to actually gain a concept. It's not like an abstract thing. It's a transformation of your life. It's a transformation of your worldview. It's a transformation of your world. Same thing, you work to produce an artwork. I mean, maybe work is not the right term, but it's an event. So sometimes we lose that understanding in this conversation of like an in between or power effects, okay, theory, the bemoaning the fact that now theory has kind of virus the art world, and that can be used as power effects for legitimation or whatever, you know what I mean? Every time we actually have to gain these concepts or gain these practices. So maybe I want to say this, that when Sylvère died, Sylvère and Etel Adnan died kind of close together. They were like a week apart. And this maybe has something to do with power. And it's a gift that Sylvère gave to me on his way out. So I want to share it. And I was wondering, okay, I had started to write this text for Sylvère, and I really wanted to honor him. He was really, has made my life the way it is and transformed my life, and has ushered me into a family, with Hetty and Chris and everyone, so many of us. And so Hetty had gone to Argentina, and usually I would like defer to Hetty for like strategic moves about power, because he's very astute, and also has some level of lack of attachment that it helps for strategy. But then he was in Argentina, and I thought, okay, how am I going to do this to get this text published? And so I wrote to Nassia, and then I was able to get it published with the Brooklyn Rail. And so I had this image, and it was a knot threads knotted. And the vision, so this is the gift of Sylvère. The vision is kind of, it has an internal movement, the knots, and they unknot by themselves automatically. And this is this gift of unknotting access to power, situations of power, that then, you know, you have to be responsible for if you have a voice. But so what was interesting too is that there was this phrase that came with that gift. Attell and Sylvère's gift, Attell's gift is a little different. They placed the gift on something I already had and renewed it, imperceptibly perhaps, as a renewal on the way out. And so I just want to offer this. Sylvère was really uninterested in power, uninterested in occupying the position of subjectivity, the position of being, you know, the position of certitude, certainty. He broke it apart. He played within it, and he really worked to actually establish some ways of being in there, you know, and that's work. And then he did kind of give this gift of the unraveling knot. So I want to share it.
Thank you so much, Nora, and thank you so much to Charles and Paul as well for this really extraordinary and moving and very present and ahead-looking conversation. So maybe since we are here, thanks to Iris and to Fong, you know, if you'd like to say a word, Iris, Fong, of course, would be very, very privileged to hear you. And then, of course, we'll have the great, great, great privilege of hearing the great, great, great Eileen Myles read to celebrate Sylvère's life.
Thank you, Donitian. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Nora. Sylvère and Idris often come to my home, which is here, the former office Brooklyn Rail, when we have 10 plus people cramming in this space, working on the Brooklyn Rail. He has been a very dear friend because every time he came, we would have long dinner, drinking into the night, talking about exactly what being talked just now. And I remember we talk about Nancy Spero and Leon Golub, and their reference also their admiration to Atto, an author that I grew up in Vietnam. One of my great uncle translated his text into Vietnamese, so I'm familiar with his whole being, really. I think the whole idea of space of resistance is also the space that had tremendous energy. When Paul was referring to humility from the very beginning, I can't help but to think of Polyvirio, which is in the film that Sylvère did toward the end, that he said that humility is tomorrow virtue, humility is truth. And it's interesting, we tend to forget there was such long tradition of resistance. You know, resistance also in the same way that now urgent. I can't help but to think of, you know, Thoreau Civil Disobedience, for example. I just reread it recently. That was written in protest against institutional slavery and also against the war in Mexico. And that was 1849, I believe. And it basically, I'm paraphrasing him, here and there, every now and then, we must rise up to be the counter friction against the machine, you know? So I think that space resistance that we talk about in regard to theory, we also tend to forget that theory means two things, right, Charles? It means speculation, but it also means contemplation. And if you want to go further back, you know, it also means to look at something, to view something and beholding it. So it had all this multitude meaning. I think Sylvère was super frustrated how post, structuralism and theory was being institutionalized and make it rigid into this tiny pocket of specialization. I'm so happy that you mentioned that book by Faucillon in a way, because the life forms it's an important book, partly because it argues for the autonomy of the artist that can express in material and techniques. It cannot be reducible readily to social and economic factor, Charles. It's so important to think like that, but I can't help to think also the idea of how Sylvère and in a way, Hakim Bey, as you all remember in that book, 1991, I think, TAZ, Temporary Autonomous Zone, they used to be friends. You can correct me, Eileen, but Peter Limbo Wilson, who's still with us, and that space of resistance, civil disobedience, the space of compassion, a space of energy, is also space in between things. And that's very important, because I remember once talking to Honorly Newman, Bonnet Newman's widow, and how she told me that Bonnet Newman entire discovery of, Peter Prokopton, mutual aid, the factor of evolution, that was very important in his practice, which is what I always felt, what Sylvère has been doing is always knowing what to do, how to activate that space in between. He doesn't have to choose one way or another. It's always a space in between to activate and make it work with that injected poetic terrorism. I always felt that was the way to, it's not shock, Paul, when I remember your performance of the Koonin, I didn't think that was humor. I didn't see it was making fun of the Koonin. I thought it was incredible philosophical and affection, even, you can even say. It's what a recent friend, a terrific art historian named James Lauren, we were talking about the Koonin just the other day. And out of the blue, he said the term chronic urgency. I like it very much. Chronic urgency, chronic urgency is almost identical to Walt Whitman's notion of cosmic optimism. It's the activation of the act. And I think Sylvère knows what to do with having an idea, contemplating in a subject, an issue, speculating it, but he also knows how to make that into fruitful activism, a real vision that found action to be materialized upon. And that's why he loved artists. He understands exactly what you said there, Danachi, artist, philosopher, or philosopher, artist. It's not just Hegelian. It's really more adaptive to our condition. I would say since the 60s, when you think about the war in Vietnam being ended abruptly in 75, it was very disturbing to a lot of us, because all the great progressive lab or radical lab moved to the academy. Sylvère had a foot in the academy, but that's not what he wanted only. He wanted the other foot equally on the street, to be in touch with all of us, with Eileen. Eileen never spent time in the academy. She dipped in and out, they dipped in and out here and there. But that's the beauty. That's the great devoted life of Sylvère Lotringer, is that he knows how to activate that autonomous zone in the middle. And that's what inspired me doing the Brooklyn Rail, It's different, Paul. In the West Coast, artists live so far away. So the academy is providing the family a sense of community. It's not quite similar here in New York and the East Coast, but it's not a ranting against the academy. Don't get me wrong, it's just both. And that's why you make work and not just teach. Charles, you, Paul, you know. But anyway, my dedication to Sylvère as a friend is that we share this deep commitment to be sure that the baton of culture is passed on, so that younger people would find the courage to activate that space in between. It really is that, it's passing on the baton, and not fear all the complexity, you know, just like Artaud believe that madness is the dismemberment of the mind in the body, you know? I think that's what I feel when I think of Sylvère, and I'm grateful to him as a friend. He's more like a poet than he is a philosopher at times. And that's what I love about Sylvère too. Poetry is so huge in the way he think and write. And yeah, I mean, I think about him, particularly now where we are. We need his spirit, and we need to be very strong. And I think this is why I'm grateful also to have met the Libri only once. But it's through his work that I realized when former president came to television on March 16, Monday, and when he says social distancing, I realized that he's very good using technology through Twig, which is speed, which is Paul has spent his whole entire life study. Speed to use it and to destroy culture. And it's our job to mobilize slowness of culture, to counter that friction, to counter that machine, you know? And that's where I really am grateful to Sylvère most. It's his thinking, but also the community of his friends. So the whole world of Sylvère universe, including you all here today, is all brought together, just like what you say, Donitia. The multitude under our feet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phong. It's very, very, very moving. Iris, would you like to say something?
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, I really want to thank everyone, really, really a lot. The Brooklyn Rail piece was just phenomenal. I can't say enough adjectives until the language is finished. It was just such an echo of different voices. And I think that does show a little bit what Sylvère is, because he was an extremely complex person. He had so many passions, so many interests. He was so open. And I don't remember if it was John Kelsey or Jim Fletcher, but someone described, and what you talked with Sylvère, it was almost like he electrified you. And it's also funny, he was an intellectual, no doubt, a theorist, but he was one with a big heart, and he actually wasn't so keen on so many intellectual talks. He was always trying to simplify things, and it was a great gift too. He touched so many people, and he always tried to make it understandable and to, you know, anyway, we all are touched by him. We all love him in many different ways, and he is present. And again, I thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Iris. So moving on to extraordinary energy and to the great manifestation of poetic life, as Iris was saying. Eileen, the floor is yours.
Great, wonderful. This has been such an amazing event. So special, like as special as Sylvère was special. And I'm already getting apologies in the chat for people who are leaving. So I'm going to read for about 10 minutes, and it's a little bouquet of poems, some of which Sylvère published. So I think to start off with something I think of just, he was a tender man. And so this was, Semiotext published my book of poems, not me. I had the honor of being the only book of poetry that's Semiotext ever published. And it was as much, I think, the moment of Sylvère's collaboration with Chris Kraus too, when it started to be native agents as well, which strikes me as such a moment in his development, almost as if, like the fact that Artaud said, "I have come to Mexico to make contact with the red earth," and that now we don't start any event anywhere on the planet, hopefully, without saying we are standing here on Lenape land. And so we've all made this incredible journey, and Sylvère made it with us. So this is called "And Then the Weather Arrives." I don't know no one anymore who's up all night. Wouldn't it be fun to hear someone really tired come walking up your stairs and knock on your door? Come here and share the rain with me, you. Isn't it wonderful to hear the universe shudder how old it all, everything must be? How slow it goes, steaming coffee, marvelous morning, the tiniest hairs on the tree's arms coming visible. I like it better, no one knows sweetness, moving your lips in silence, closing your eyes all night. It's so much better disarming myself from terror and light passing through a painting I stuck on a window earlier when I was scared. It's great, it's really great. Trees hold the world and the weather moves slow. Even a body dissolves and takes a place incorrectly. Everywhere I would like to nuzzle and plant a heart in the world voiceless. I began knocking, ridiculous, just to hear your echo back, arm against face, just to stop those fucking trucks. My thoughts are vanishing into that sweetness. And this one, I could stop right there, but I won't. This one, Sylvère published twice, and so I have to read it. And it carries a strong memory of a group of us in '93 went to Germany. It was me, it was Kathy, it was Chris, it was Richard Hell, it was Len Tillman, it was Sylvère, it was Ann Rauer, and it was a very funny tour because I think the person who organized the tour had just been revealed to be Stasi. So all over Germany, we saw headlines saying, "Thanks to Sasha," and then a grim picture of all of us standing there. I was born in Boston in 1949. I never wanted this fact to be known. In fact, I've spent the better half of my adult life trying to sweep my early years under the carpet and have a life that was clearly just mine and independent of the historic fate of my family. Can you imagine what it was like to be one of them, to be built like them, to talk like them, to have the benefits of being born into such a wealthy and powerful American family? I went to the best schools, had all kinds of tutors and trainers, traveled widely. I met the famous, the controversial, and the not so admirable, and I knew from a very early age that if there were ever any possibility of escaping the collective fate of this famous Boston family, I would take that route, and I have. I hopped on an Amtrak to New York in the early '70s, and I thought you could say my hidden years began. I thought, well, I'll be a poet. What could be more foolish and absurd? I became a lesbian. Every woman in my family looks like a dyke, but it's really stepping off the flag when you become one. Well, holding this ignominious pose I have seen and I have learned, and I'm beginning to think there's no escaping history. A woman I was currently having an affair with said, "You know, you look like a Kennedy." I felt the blood rising in my cheeks. People have always laughed at my Boston accent, confusing large for large, party for party. But when this unsuspecting woman evoked for the first time my family's name, I knew the jig was up. Yes, I am a Kennedy, and I await your orders. You are the new Americans. I'm ruining my own poem. Yes, I am a Kennedy. My efforts to remain obscure have not served me well. Starving as a humble poet, I quickly climbed to the top of my profession, assuming a position of leadership and honor. It is right that a woman should call me out now. Yes, I am a Kennedy, and I await your orders. You are the new Americans. The homeless are wandering the streets of our nation's greatest city. Homeless men with AIDS are among them. Is that right? That there's no homes for the homeless? That there's no free medical help for these men and women? That they get the message as they are dying that this is not their home? And how are your teeth today? Can you afford to fix them? How high is your rent? If art is the highest and most honest form of communication of our time, and the young artist is no longer able to move here to speak to her time. Yes, I could, but that was 15 years ago. And remember, as I must. I am a Kennedy. Shouldn't we all be Kennedys? Our nation's greatest city is home of the businessman, home of the rich artist, people with beautiful teeth who are not on the streets. What should we do with this dilemma? Listen, I have been educated. I have learned about Western civilization. Do you know what the message of Western civilization is? I am alone. Am I alone today? I don't think so. Am I the only one with bleeding gums in this room today? Am I the only homosexual in this room? Am I the only one whose friends have died or dying now? My art can't be supported until it's gigantic, bigger than everyone else's, confirming the audience's feeling that they are alone, that they alone are good, deserve to buy the tickets to see this art, are working, are healthy, should survive, and are normal. Are you normal today? Everyone here, are we all normal? It is not normal for me to be a Kennedy, but I am no longer ashamed, no longer alone. I'm not alone today because we are all Kennedys, and I am your president. And this one I called Sail Baby, and I lifted the title from Elizabeth Murray, who made a painting for her mother who had just died. And I thought of this with Sylvère because I thought of him as a very maternal man. The dog's deceptively clean bowl. My apartment is like this ache at the Whitney. I like the Savarin room. According to what? And in order to make a really abstract novel, you're like a restaurant that doesn't exist anymore. When I pick up turds, it goes boom, boom, boom in my head. Yesterday to speed up Friday, today's Sunday, jumping already. Taboo goes, Taboo, incidentally, who has an amazing show at Karma right now in New York. You should go. Taboo goes woo woo at me at the bridge. I've got a new word, flaneur. Yeah, and I'm writing poetry in the new thing. I'm a flaneur too, I say. This bridge called Woo Woo, standing on Essex, and she's everywhere. Mom, the nothing spot where a tree so long ago been. And this is the first poem I thought I would read for Sylvère for some reason. It's called September 7th. The vagina of my life is so stretched out. I thought, where am I? Hundreds of my students landed in Brooklyn like we did last week, but it was another church. I saw the fear in their faces as I was climbing the gates and demanding we make the next connection. It was an old church. The congestion was various, ecstatic. Yes, that's what this is, a little crazy, lost, poor. Everyone, they needed an assignment. When do we meet? When do we meet again? Is this just sentimental? Am I the priest? Describe the congregation, that's what I'll ask. It was a little like Calandia. The churches were trains, they were nations, homeless, they were punishment. We seem to gather here. Describe us, that's the only hope. Why are we out? Why aren't we home? No, it's us, and I know you very well. You seem to be following me. I brought you here. What do I want? It's cityless. It's godless. It's fatherless. It's motherless. It always feels the same. Meeting at monuments, God asking for something. I lost my notebook. My computer died. I smell like fear. I didn't get any sleep. I wanted to be here. I couldn't keep watching that show. I finished the book about trees. Everything's stone in the name of God, but it's just us, pointless at night. I'm not really at the helm. I can't be blamed. Did I ask you here? I just woke up like everyone in this swarm. It's my disease that I think I'm responsible, that it's a class. It's not a reading. I'm not in charge. I said over there, think, give them a purpose. Why did you come here tonight? Tell me what you see. Tell me who we are, what we want. Come back here again next week or sometime. Show me what you did. Only the shrink asked if I said this to everyone. What did I say? Am I saying it now? Is that why we're here? Tell me next week. Tell me next month, next year. I'll send a mailing tomorrow. You'll know when to come. I'll know who you are. I won't forget anyone. If I seem like I would always be there, well, it just isn't true. You know at a certain point you hate the theme song, but you have to go on. This is after that. This is next. What did he like? I guess everyone's asking you that now. What do I like? All of us out there at night, not even looking for God, looking for religion, not even that, looking at churches, meeting here, looking back to see what I want. You can make me choose. It's not that I have a purpose. It's more like I don't want you to think I don't have one. It's not that I don't have sex, don't like it. I forget where it happens. I can fix that. I can start while I travel, just having a little bit with everyone next time I see you all. And I have one final poem, and it's a silly pun. The poem is called Sylvia. It's to the girl in Sylvère, I believe. Later, the whole generosity of dogs and the silver sun, my loneliness like a sash, that boat in the distance, triangle heart, sylph with a beard, got wet and gleaming black. What I like about you. Go deeper now into the present. Out there with the kid on the swing, everybody sit there. Doesn't mean I'll be here when I am. Kids out there, what is Kids out there, what is divinity? Turns out something really large is on the swing. Thank you, Sylvère. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Eileen. Wow. It was extraordinary. And thank you so much to you. Thank you so much to all four of you to give us a sense that Sylvère's adventure is ahead. And you are yourself with your own extraordinary creative adventures proving the way ahead. So it was such an extraordinary privilege. I'm repeating the word extraordinary, but I really, really mean it because I'm very moved to be with you tonight here in Paris, in the early afternoon in New York, and in the morning in Los Angeles. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And seemingly there is a lot to be done.
Thank you so much, Eileen. Thank you, Donatien. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Nora. This has been an amazing afternoon, and thank everyone else. I thank everyone else for being here today to honor Sylvère. We encourage everyone to view our archive of these conversations on our YouTube channel, where we will upload today's conversation shortly. And I hope that you can please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for our 77th Radical Poetry reading featuring Rindo Johnson, Camilo Roldan, Ken Walker, Ali Warren, and Ted Dodson. And you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank you everyone so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Nora.
Thank you, Donatien. Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Nora.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Donatien.
Yeah, you guys are amazing. Thank you, every one of you.
Thank you.
Beautiful reading. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hattie.
So
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Long live Sylvère Lotringer.
Yes.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Love to Idris. Thank you, Idris.
Yay.
Thank
Great to meet you all. Thank you. Each
Thank
one of
you.
you.
Thank you, Eileen.
Recorded, so you get that's Eileen. That was Eileen.
That was it's
What's that?
recorded. They're fabulous, Karen. I mean, it's
Thanks,
just
everyone.
thank you guys. That was beautiful, extraordinary.
Thank you, everyone.
Long live Sylvère.
Maybe
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Donatien. Thank you, Eileen, for the beautiful reading. See you soon, Iris.
Very soon.
Love. Much love and courage.
Thank you, really, everyone. It was wonderful. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Noah. Ciao.
Ida, ciao.
Ciao.
Great to see you, Reese.
Andrew.
Bye.
Roxanne.
Bye, Eileen. Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.